Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of The Business of YouTube. And today we have as a special guest, we have Wim Ponnet. And it's great to have Wim to this episode because he has been in a lot of intersections, very early days of platforms at Yahoo, then in production, more traditional media at Endemol, and then in sport, and then as an investor. Like, it's hard to define what you do, Wim. So we're going to learn a bit more and get a bit of your story and your point of view. And thank you for being here with me today, Wim.
Thank you for having me, Paula. And yeah, I struggle myself. We've known each other for a couple of years. We've definitely seen a lot of iterations of the industry, and probably a few iterations of ourselves as well.
Absolutely. And I remember like the first time we met, you were at Endemol, and that was a while back. And actually, that was an intro that was through Alessandro Tucci.
Correct.
Hi,
Yeah.
Alessandro, by the way.
Yeah.
We should have him here as well, like from a different point of view. And I remember that we met, and at the time, not a lot of people in traditional media were really like, whenever I was meeting people, they were like, what are you talking about, literally? Maybe I needed to improve my skills in communication skills, that's for sure. But I remember we met, and I was like, we speak the same language. I was like, wait a second, why do we understand each other? And then I remember your story. So tell us a bit of your story.
Yeah, listen, I vividly remember when we met as well, and I was at Endemol Shine at the time, and I was coming from the platform side then, because I was running strategy and operations for Yahoo prior to that, and definitely for the first couple of years, I did not feel like I was speaking the same language as the legacy players, who were still talking about here's how you program people, and when sort of the industry was starting to move away from that thinking to algorithmic thinking. But that wasn't the question. We'll come back on that in a minute. I have a very weird, I don't know whether you can call it a career or sort of life story. Is I started my career in sports. So as a professional athlete, I paddled kayaks. I was pretty good at it. Through the whole kayaking thing, I ended up working for Coca-Cola in the early 2000s. Did a fair bit of traveling, worked on things like the Euro 2008, football, got involved a little bit in that. Figured out soon enough that I was allergic to all things inefficient. And so in a logical way, I moved more into this, hey, here's a really difficult enigma to solve, go and try to do that. And I ended up working at Yahoo in the late 2000, early 2010s. When Yahoo was still a household name, you were at Google. We were there a little bit before. When you think of it, we had Flickr and Messenger and got mail, search.
Yahoo was the real deal, actually. There was a fantastic team, to be fair. All the people of that time, I'm still in contact with people from different regions of the world. It was a fantastic team. It was really, really like great team and great,
we share
great
quite
problem solvers.
From that era, right? Like it's and you walk into any big tech company now, you're gonna meet ex-Yahoos, right? Like it's the place is littered with it. And I think some of these early challenges that like sort of challenger platforms deal with now, Yahoo had to work through all of that, right? From the beginning. Like it was the beginning of the internet boom.
That was really the beginning.
Like it was the first platform to reach over a billion, like sort of daily active users, and how do you monetize that and all of that. So that was a super platform, to be working with, right? We did some really great things. We did some really stupid things in terms of acquisitions. Passed on some great opportunities, right? Like Facebook and Google, to name but few, that Yahoo could have acquired and obviously knew how to do way better. Search, well, sure, we can build that ourselves. Social, well, let's just build that ourselves, and how wrong you can be. And I think some great learnings from that, right? Like I had 5 CEOs in my first 2 years at Yahoo, and each had a different view and a different business plan. And ultimately, I don't think anybody has really managed to revive that brand and extract the full value of it. But it's a massive learning experience, and I think that really sort of sets you up in terms of understanding the full digital ecosystem. Everything from monetization to how do you build an audience to how do you actually leverage the reach and the engagement you have. And so sort of all those early metrics, right, were sort of developed at the beginning. And then in 2015, when this whole Verizon deal was happening, so when I left Yahoo, I ended up through my old boss, Don Airy, being introduced to James Murdoch and Aaron Stone at Apollo with this great thing. Hey, we're going to put 2 companies together, Endemol and Shine. Sophie Turner-Lang as the CEO, and why don't you come in and help run strategy? And because this is a business that needs digital knowledge injected in it, and so I didn't think much of TV, and I think in many ways I was proven right in terms of what to expect in terms of how a business like that operates and how to do that. But I was blown away by James Murdoch in particular, and how well he actually understood the whole ecosystem. And I don't think he actually gets enough credit in terms of how well somebody like him actually understands what's really happening in media. And I think he's gone on to do great things now in terms of some of the investments he's made with Geo and things like that in India, where you go like, that was actually quite visionary in terms of helping that get set up. And so that's really what convinced me. And I was never going to do that without also having the revenue piece, because I think the whole strategy thing without actually looking at how things monetize is a lot of
Lots of opinions. Yeah, it's nice for PowerPoint, but and you need action.
Correct. And so actually combining those two and then putting Endemol and Shine together, going through a very rough year of integration, a very rough 2016 where I think we missed our numbers by a mile, which I think then led to actually us also starting to have these discussions and finally being able to push some of that much needed transformation through and starting to really inject some of that digital knowledge. And that was the thing, right? Like it was people like yourselves and people like Yannick Ferrero, who's at Hasbro, you are now, and guys like that, bringing those guys in and saying, hey, we need to turn this business around, right? Like we need to look for other ways to actually get exposure for the great IP that is sat in this company.
And there was some very great IP. I mean, I remember when we met as well, like there was Joe Hardinson as well was there, and
Joe
I
was there,
interviewed him in the podcast, and it still sticks in my mind. I think that he created 10 to 15 channels of Mr. Bean, like not one, 10 to 15.
No, absolutely. Like, right? Yeah, it was outsourcing, like that IP that was ultimately outsourced to other people, bringing it in-house and saying, hey, how are we now going to build off that? Because back in the day, right, like the latest original piece of content that was created for Mr. Bean was 30 years old, right? Like so it's what can we do here? And Rowan was in no mood to go and do new series, so it's animation and then figuring out a little bit engagement farming in many ways, but actually understanding what to post when and upload that, and bringing people like Joe in at the time was and there were other people like George and like so many people that actually had a real impact on the outcome of the business. And
to be honest, I still use that example like from back in the days in terms of archive monetization, because a lot of archives stay there to get the dust, literally, like digitally speaking, in sport, in many different industries. But I think there's a gold mine, like ROI there is like to the roof, because they're just getting the dust. It's zero or nearly zero, like eventually. Not Mr. Bean, but digitally, like it was zero. Like if you don't use it yourself, or like
nowhere. Yeah, and I think you're right, right? So the first thing that we started doing is like Endemol and Shine as well at the time were fundamentally at their heart production companies, right? Like they were sat on IP, but like literally when you look at it over the years, there's millions of hours of content there, and probably an active catalog of 100,000 hours. But you have people that come from a very traditional distribution side of the business, trying to retain control of that because, well, every year we know just about what we're going to sell, but there is no understanding of yield management across the full catalog there, or there is no pricing strategy even for the sort of the traditional content sales. And I believe that hasn't changed that much even now, right? Like post the sale to Banijay, and so you need to inject people who understand that you don't necessarily need to produce everything new. You can actually leverage the IP you have there, and you need to be smarter about how you create once and then publish in many ways and monetize in many ways, and start predicting actually what your revenue flows are going to look like. Start building things where people like Joe and Yannick were amazing, right? Is bringing in that hygiene in terms of, okay, this looks a little bit like this. We're going to start exploring that on that channel, consolidating everything into one CMS, having a single reporting system, actually figuring out how well your content does. And you build a multi-million business on a monthly basis, right? Like you can see those revenues come in. And
yeah, not peanuts. I mean, of course, there's not going to be the first revenue line, fair enough, on a company like that, but it's double-digit millions. So
it's oh yeah,
altogether,
yeah, it's tens of millions every year. But it is,
exactly,
given you're not creating anything new necessarily for it, it comes with a super high margin, right? Like so
exactly. The
for a
cost of
business
it
that,
is limited, and the ROI is fairly high. Like so,
yeah, 100%. And it's very easy on, like, let's say 50, 60 million revenue to be adding 30 million real free cash flow to a balance sheet. And when you have high debt to service, right, like as many of these legacy businesses have, because they're over leveraged, they're under optimized, they're under monetized in many ways, having a solid strategy just for monetization. But we didn't just use that for that, right? Like our strategy around digital was what allowed Fear Factor to come back in the US, simply because we could show to the broadcasters like Viacom through MTV in the day, right, that listen, there is an audience for this, right? Like you have people actually consuming. We got millions of you every month on this content. Just by republishing it, you need to go do something. And so that helps drag the rest of the business along as well. And I think for many broadcasters, right, who are so used to programming schedules, they need to start learning how you actually use algorithms in your favor in order to build an audience, and then you can leverage that to drive the rest of the business along.
and actually, you touched on a point that I usually make, and I don't think that the analytics of YouTube, but could be on other platforms too. It's like wherever the content is consumed, is leveraged enough for like negotiation. And in your case, it's like you make really a business case. So the revenue you're bringing is not just the revenue from digital; it's the revenue from digital, and then the deal you make with the broadcaster, because you actually showed the value with the numbers. It's like it's not an opinion. It's like then you negotiate on the opinion, and it's more like, okay, I think this is valued 10. I know, I think it's valued 5, and then you figure it out. And negotiation is really like hard to make it. It's like, well, you already have the numbers. You can have
I
a
think
plus
YouTube,
20, minus 20%, but that's about it. This is the value of it.
I think YouTube in many ways, right, is the world's biggest incubator for IP ever built. And I don't think legacy media businesses really understand that. When you look at how the larger creators, right, like just in a traditional media business, right, these legacy media businesses, all of these people, they're influencers, like they're not influencers. They're micro studios in themselves that actually monetize, they're just micro studios with way better data than even a Disney has, right? Like they rights owners should view creators as R&D, to go and build them IP. They're not a competition for them. They should use that as R&D to go and see what works, right? And they should move away from formats to, because they are the true multi-format IP owners, right? Like it's shorts, it's long form, it's live, it's merchandising, it's podcast. A good creator now runs all of that. And legacy businesses haven't, in my view, yet made that shift fully yet, to actually look at the things they do as multi-format IP. It is still, I want to create a format and I want to send that all over the world. And none of them, when you look at even the core valuation of businesses like that, there is zero value attached to the catalog. And it's a wrong assumption, because it's actually where the high margin is. And it's actually where the real opportunity is in that IP, because any production business is a cost plus type of business. It's 10% margin at best. A lot of these things barely break even, and unless you get them to really travel, and there are very few formats in that world that still travel, you need to be smarter about it, and you need to leverage that creator like working, right? Is look at it as a multi-format and look at your monetization, but also your distribution, as something that doesn't just stay on platform. I think you are very short-sighted, even as a broadcaster or as a rights holder or whatever, to just look at your IP as, well, this is going to go to Netflix or this is going to go to TV. And by the way, if you look at platforms like Netflix, they are moving more and more into this space, right? It's like they're moving more into gamification, more and more into merchandising, more and more into licensing of that content. And those businesses, they're eating away at the, look at Stranger Things, right? How successful is Stranger Things in terms of the merchandising? And that is just because all of these little spin-offs and all of these little collaborations that are done on the side. And legacy businesses are not there yet.
Yeah, there's more business to be done with these IPs, like on a 360 level, really. Yeah, and what next then? Like you were then Endemol Shine, and what was the next adventure?
The next adventure was a sale of Endemol Shine. Like you cannot go without that. Like in the middle of COVID, we managed to spin off this business. We sold it to Banijay, like another fairly legacy business, right? Who I think in a brilliant sort of way of financial engineering merged that with a gambling company. They've just acquired another one now. Reverse merger with a SPAC. All, I think, brilliantly done. And I, in my naivety, probably thought, hey, I can go and do my own thing now and set up my own sort of investment company with the aim to go and look at all of these things that are equally disrupted as media. Sports is a very logical one that sort of come to mind. So we made a few investments in that space. With 3 other partners, launched a company called Fantech. We made a couple of investments through that entity. And then on my own, I did a lot of work working with technology companies, some in which I own a stake, some in which in terms of helping and making those businesses bigger and better. The latest iteration of that was and still is QuickPlay, which is a streaming technology provider. Nothing but good things to say about that business. And yeah, I think now we're sort of ready for another pivot and looking at sort of what to do next. Some of these things are potential further investment, all within our space, right? Like anything from digital media to digital commerce to. So we're looking at a couple of things in that space, and yeah, essentially anybody who needs somebody who understands, I think, the way things operate, monetize, and digitize in a digital economy or environment, or a media or sports environment, can probably benefit from the things we do. That's very vague, but it encompasses so many things. Anything from things I'm involved with heavily on the AI side in terms of personalization of education and large data sets, to I'm helping Sphera partners with a little bit of advisory on the investment in women's sports. which I think is another area we should probably talk about, because
Yeah,
I
what's
think.
exciting for you in the sports slash platform environment? Because now you're starting more into sports, and but you're a platform guy. I don't know. From my point of view, it's a good thing. I don't know. It doesn't sound very. It sounds a bit weird, but it's a
No, 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 I hear
very good
you.
thing. Like, where do you see the opportunity? Like, what is exciting you, like in terms of sports and platforms?
So I think there's a couple of things, right? So I'm fundamentally and proudly European to begin with, right? So I look at Europe as a real EMEA, right? Because I think there's a lot of opportunity in the Middle East as well. But I look at EMEA as a real opportunity, and Europe in particularly for sports, for a couple of reasons. So first of all, there is the real thing that our sports are real cultural pieces. They are unlike Americans who are going to create teams that are located somewhere and they're gonna call that the Miami Flippers or whatever. Like there is no legacy, whereas our sports clubs and teams and leagues here have hundreds of years of legacy, and there is a real cultural attachment to those things that goes beyond pure financial and commercial incentive to like them. Like people who are followers of a team here are diehard fans, and I think the difference with the US is you probably have that with colleges, you have that less with professional sports teams. So that's one thing where I think it's a real thing, because there is real passion, real engagement, and real authenticity about those things, which is something that, as you know, thrives incredibly well in the digital space, right? Authenticity is really key. The second reason I think sports is an interesting area is because of the under optimization of how these things are run. They should be run like entertainment businesses, but they are not, right? And as Rupert Murdoch used to always say, the problem with newspapers is that they're run by people who love newspapers, and so they run them like newspapers. It's very much the same in sports, right? They are run like by people who love or are passionate about rugby or football, but they're not run like pieces of IP that actually would allow you to monetize them better. And so it's still a model where I'm going to license this out to whoever is the broadcaster that pays highest, and then we'll see what is there. And
Yeah,
we'll come
most
back.
probably my perception out there is that in the sport industry, still, if you say entertainment is kind of not perceived like as a positive thing at all. It's like if you think entertainment is WWE, which in terms of economics, that's not doing bad, to be fair.
Yeah,
And it is entertainment at its best. It doesn't need to be WWE. Um, it might be like a sport with its grassroots and everything, but the storytelling, well, you can't escape
I
that.
agree with you, and I think this goes back to the point we were making earlier, right? Around, for a very large generation now, even a football or soccer for our American friends, a football game is not their main way of consuming that content. They will watch highlights. They will follow a Ronaldo or a Messi on their socials. Increasingly, the game itself is not the main link that an entire younger generation has with a sport. And so when I say you need to look at these things as entertainment brands, is you need to be able to figure out how you're going to reuse that content and what other content you're going to create around it. Listen, Drive to Survive on Netflix brought millions of fans in North America into Formula One that would have never consumed Formula One content otherwise. And everybody tries to do the same. I don't think it's the platforms like the Netflix or the Primes, or I think YouTube and TikTok and all these others are way better ways to, at a reasonable cost, talk to all of these players. And I think that's the way you need to think about it. And actually, as a third point on sports, women's sports is the other under optimized thing, right? Like, first of all, brands love it because it's surfacing values that you don't necessarily see in a football game anymore, right? Like where it's oh, I'm gonna fall down now and cry and try and get a penalty and things like that. I think women's sports has the possibility to be a vehicle to bring across other values as well. It doesn't have the media exposure yet that it should, and it probably is ripe for an entirely new way of going direct to consumer without actually in a similar way that markets like China and India and others haven't had that large TV market and went digital first. I think for women's sports, there is a real opportunity to go way more direct to consumer and actually build an audience there and build things from the beginning in such a way that actually they are going to create a lot of value. And those are the three main points of why I believe and you see capital being put behind. I mentioned Sphera Partners before, right? There's two ladies there, like Nikki and Jessica, the two main drivers there, who are doing an amazing job in actually identifying opportunities in there and then actually going and raising the capital to go and do it. And Michelle Wong, other people, right, are putting money into this space, and that is going to drive another boom with not necessarily, I think, the same consumption habits of sports that people are going to come there. Like, listen, I come from a sports of kayaking, which nobody in the world watches, right? Like, it's how do sports like that survive and monetize is actually there's more opportunities to do that now, right? Like it's not necessarily about reach. It's about relevance way more than it is about reach, right? If you are extremely relevant to an audience of even 1 million users, you have ways actually of making that a viable business rather than having to have 200 million people globally consume, right? You're not going to make the same amount of money, but you don't have to make the same investment either, right? Like you actually get to monetize that better and drive that better. And that's why sports is such an interesting asset class.
Yeah. And also, like, to your point of women sports, there is one thing that I follow very much, especially what's happening in the US. Not a bit more as well in the European area, but in the US, I'm really fascinated from the fact that they are just thinking different. The thing is, like, if you look at Atlas, for example, in Times Square, it's like there's a complete, because it's starting anyway. In some sports, women is like, I don't know, volleyball. If you think of volleyball, it's a women's sports, and then a men's sports as well. But
tennis, women's tennis. Women's tennis,
most of the others is like you need to, like, because you're kind of like, let's say football, it's not starting from scratch, but it's kind of from a business perspective. So you need to have different rules and you need to think it differently. And that's the beauty of it as well. You don't need to just copy paste a playbook because it's not going to work out, period. You have 50 years of legacy versus 0 or like 1 or 5 or whatever. And if you're just using the same playbook, it's never going to work out. It's going to be just an ugly copy of something else that is kind of working, but it's not even like business models are like needs to be rethought through anyway in men's sports. So it's better to figure it out differently and thinking differently and just be creative with it, because then it's going to be a different story. And that's, I think there is really a lot of not storytelling, but then it's just business models and just moving the boundaries like big time. Like when I see that Atlas in Times Square, so like just doing something that just don't think of for traditional sports, because it's something you cannot do because it's always been done that way. It's not for women's sports, so that's the fun part of it.
I agree, and I actually do think that even flipping the format, like, does it need to be played on the same pitch? Does it need to be 11 against 11? Does it need to be like it might be a completely different format, even in that
exactly
sense.
Exactly.
And the thing we always have a little bit, I think, in Europe is that sort of purist. It's that's not the game of football, or listen, in so many other parts in life, right? It's in golf, like the tee off is not that the same. Why does it need to be the same, right? Like, just make it so that women can actually also play to their strengths and drive that. And I think it'll be all for the better for it, because there's no reason why technically, listen, a woman is never going to be like the median woman or the median man. There are never going to be exactly as strong or exactly as, and it, you don't need to be, right? As long as it is competitive and it's beautiful, I think it has a great opportunity to actually be something very different. And even the fan experience, right? Like it's if you look at football in markets like the UK or whatever, like it's still, do you want to go and stand on a Sunday in the rain, like, for, like, does it need to be like that? Like, can it be a different format there as well, right? Like, you don't need to play it in the same stadia, you don't need to play it in the same,
Yeah,
it can
it
be
could be a
more.
completely different product, and there's no problem with that. But even like if you to your point, there is one thing that I usually compare, which sometimes is not very loud. But anyway, a lot of people keep saying that, for example, young generations, they have a very short attention span, and they do not watch 90 minutes of football, which I disagree with that. Big time. Not that they don't like short form content. They love short form content, but they love what they love. I mean, they like some formats more than others, and they do spend a lot of time in watching something that they love. And once I was in a panel, I was interviewing in the Kings League, and we were talking about the length of a live stream for Kings League. So the duration is usually 7 to 8 hours for a game, which is an absurd number of hours. Okay, not 90 minutes; it's 7 to 8 hours, and the average they were saying of the consumption was like super high. So now the question is, why somebody saying that young generations are just watch like 15 seconds and scroll? They do if they don't like the content. Period.
Look at
So,
esports, Paula. Look at esports on Twitch, right? It has some of the longest view times anywhere, right? Like it, and that's another platform, right? Like it's super niche, not that niche, but
well,
it's
nice niche though. I'd like
nice.
to have that.
You like to own something like that, yeah?
Yeah,
As would
no
I.
problem with niche. No problems with
No,
niches.
no. But esports is the same, right? Like it gets really long view times, and actually, when you look at the average time spent on platforms like it's, and even TikTok, right? Is the it's You're supposed to be on it for 5 minutes, and you end up saying, "Where did that last hour and a half go?"
Yeah,
Right?
the rabbit hole.
It's doom scrolling, but you're still very much engaged with the platform, right? It's not. I think it's the wrong way to look at it as, oh, I watch a 15-second clip or whatever. I don't think that's it at all. I think it is the length you engage with the platform is what you should compare it with.
Yeah, because it's still a time investment, and young generations do know what they want and what they don't want. So it's not just if the format doesn't work, if the product doesn't work, they don't buy the product. End of story. I mean, it's the basics of economics. It's like there's demand and offer. If the offer is not bought, then there's no demand, or vice versa. Figure out the product that people want to pay for in a way or another. So there is, and especially for niche sports or like women's sports, like anything that is growing, that's a big deal for growth. Understanding how different generations and different platforms do work very well for them in their advantage, 100%.
Yeah, how do you start looking at the athletes you have in your game as well, right? As creators, as people that are part of your ecosystem, and how do you leverage that, right, to replicate your reach and increase your relevance and actually leverage that. And I think it needs to start at every single level in terms of how the contracting gets done, in terms of how engaged you have those people. And I think it did start to happen in listen, when an English team brings in a player like Son in Korea, right, you get an entire ecosystem of people from Korea traveling to come and see games and things like that. It is not yet managed to the fullest extent. And when I mentioned earlier, sports needs to start thinking about their IP as entertainment. That is exactly what I mean. And there's never been more need for a unified CRM, CSM to be able to manage that full experience in terms of, okay, how am I going to upsell a hotel or transport with the ticket? And it's another reason why I'm so excited about the space, is that I think people are slowly waking up to that, because the old model of broadcaster inflation in terms of, because that event viewing, as I call it, right? Whether it's a big live finale of some entertainment format or whether it's big live sports, are still the things that drive to traditional linear viewing, whether that's happening on a streamer or on a broadcaster. But the broadcasters and even the platforms, they're not going to continue to dish out massive licensing fees. You need to start thinking about your IP a little bit more holistically, like multi-format in terms of how you monetize it. And I don't think that's the case. Yes, I think the Olympics is another one of these events where, and I wrote a piece on LinkedIn last week, I think highlighting why the Olympic Committee taken back the esports Olympic Games for themselves. It's such a huge opportunity for the IOC to actually start building this out properly and start thinking about their IP as something that should be always on, rather than, hey, this is every 4 years. And I think there's a massive opportunity there, which is, again, you can look at this as a bad thing when I say this is an entertainment thing, or you can look at this is actually an opportunity for the IOC to create the platform that is actually going to allow them to give back to the federations on other sports as well. Because if you're an ice skater or an Olympic diver or a kayaker or a runner, you don't get a platform like you get when you're playing in the Premier League or you're in the Champions League playing football or playing tennis at Wimbledon, or you do not get that platform. So how do you build something that is actually going to be good for the overall ecosystem without having somebody else eat your lunch? That is something that I see as a massive opportunity for somebody like the IOC, who, again, right, have been around since 18, I don't know, whenever. The IP is something that is so valuable, yet is so under optimized in terms of actually what that is delivering and what that should be delivering back to the individual federations and athletes.
And who do you see doing very well, like leveraging very much the platforms, being YouTube or others? It could be any platform, really. Like, who's a good example to follow and for what reason?
Listen, a prime example, right, is what's happening with some of the Spanish football teams, right? Like, I think they are ultra present on YouTube and TikTok, and like, how does a Barcelona get? And you'll know these numbers better. It's been a while since I last looked at them. But how does a Barcelona get 6x the engagement and subscribers to their channels than a Chelsea or a Man United or any of those teams, right? Or how do certain teams in Portugal do way better than? I think football is getting there, but I think the good examples are some of the athletes themselves. Cristiano Ronaldo is a prime example, right, of somebody that's fully understood that, hey, getting a salary, listen, 200 million a year, I would also take it, but it's not his primary source of income, right? Like, he has his own thing and his own brands, and I think some of these successful athletes have really understood that, yes, we need to get into thinking like a little micro studio that does things multi-format and launch brands and things like that. That's, I think, is a very clear example of who is doing it well. And if there is any learning there, I think that's the learning you take.
Well, and to be fair, like I interviewed here in the podcast about Cristiano Ronaldo, Javi Gomez, who's managing the whole project behind it. And I was extremely surprised and pleasantly surprised of the way it was humble. Like, it was very humble the way they were building it, with a lot of trial and error, which, if you are like that name and that brand, is very hard to do, because it's usually like there's more rules than space to actually create. So it's like you're stuck. But they were really trying different things, different formats. Something works, something doesn't, and then learning from it, which is how do you do in platform, period.
It's super iterative, right? To my point earlier, right? It's actually the biggest incubator for formats is something like YouTube, because you I wouldn't say zero cost when you're somebody like a Cristiano Ronaldo or a Mr. Beast, or like these guys are properly investing in it, right? And they're doing it multi-language and but the beauty is some of that content is going to be evergreen, right? Like it's going to be there forever, and you know this through Buzz My videos yourself, right? There is value in catalog, and that needs to be exploited, and I think people like Future and things like that are investing in actually enabling creators to sort of deficit fund some of those things. I think are really interesting ways of looking at it, because with the right idea and sort of the right investment, I think there are more tools at people's disposal now to actually go and build a real brand around themselves on it. And I think you're starting to see that. And I would not be surprised if there are more, I think, sort of legacy businesses that start to understand that and say, hey, we really need to go a little bit more multi-format. Channel 4 in the UK is probably, I think, starting to sort of build. Listen, you mentioned Joe Harbinson before, people like Matt Risley who come out of there. I think they're smart, right, in terms of trying to build that. I think even in the BBC there are people trying to do this, but it's very hard to get, I think, a legacy business to move and embrace this when the BBC still has that word broadcast in there. I think that's that's a real break, I think, actually, on the thinking of the business is, does it need to be broadcasting, or does actually your public service mandate? I'm really doing a lot of thinking, right, around our some of our European values and how we should, I think, protect some of the rails that business run on, right, like in terms of sovereign cloud and sovereign use of AI models that actually reflect our values and our way of thinking, rather than being influenced by Beijing or Washington in terms of or Silicon Valley in terms of how those models are built. But I do think we have something unique, which probably the rest of the, well, I wouldn't say probably, which the rest of the world doesn't have, is that there is still a very high level of trust by the general population in public service content. I just don't think that we are distributing that content in the most efficient way to the viewers. And if the public service mandate really is to make sure that all sorts of views and opinions get out, maybe your own platform first isn't the right way to do it. Maybe you should think about it a little bit more holistically. And I think there's a real opportunity there to actually maybe consolidate how we bring that to market and think about it there. And I think actually it's a super opportunity to do more with less and have a bigger impact at the end.
To this point, I actually it's reminded me when I was at YouTube back in the days. I was there like from 2006 to 2011, and I remember Rai, because you were talking about public service, and Rai back in the days was the number one or number two, like it was one of the 3 top partners for YouTube in Europe. And I was very surprised, because you don't expect public service to be, not because it shouldn't be, but because, of course, you expect maybe commercial broadcast, like commercial companies, to be more like advanced and just trying to move the needle because of course, like they need to stay on the market. It's not public service. I was definitely wrong, because like Rai was like, you know what? They were so advanced. They were like, we need to have everything on YouTube, and we need to reach people. We need to be free on air. Like, and then then it changed, and there were multiple changes whatsoever. But at that time, and we're talking about like literally nearly 15, 20 years ago. Okay, so we're not talking about now, which
quite a time
is a thing. That was like far from whatever you could expect. And I remember it was like I was impressed, because those numbers were like crazy, and the logic behind it was like no nonsense. It was like, we need to have free to air, we need to have the content and reach the people wherever they are. Yeah, chapeau. Make sense?
And it's an interesting point, right? Because by 2030, there is this idea about, yeah, okay, we're going to shut off the way we deliver, via, and it needs to be all IP based, but literally the CDNs aren't there, the bandwidth isn't there to deliver. Let's take a market like the UK, right? In order to go and do that. And so maybe there are partnerships to be built there with the likes of YouTube or others that are maybe a little bit more European, in order to actually think about, okay, how do we build this? Not 10 times, right? Not a different one for Channel 5 or Channel 4 or ITV or TF1 or whatever. How do we build a common infrastructure on which we can actually go and deliver this in a way that people are actually going to consume it? But listen, algorithms now are the new they're the gatekeepers, actually, right? It's not about how you distribute, it's how you discover. And there is still this notion of what is premium content versus UGC, or what, like some of the stuff you see. I have nothing with sailing, right? I follow this channel called Sailing Le Vagabond on YouTube, simply because of how beautiful the storytelling and the things is. I've never sailed or set foot on a sailboat in my life, right? And I follow this Australian couple with their 2 kids, and I've been following them for years, simply because it's great viewing, right? The scenery is amazing, the view. And I look at that and I go, like, that is no worse and probably better and at a fraction of the cost than a lot of the stuff that you see on any travel documentary or any game show or whatever that you will have in a tier 1 market like Germany or the UK or Australia, for that matter. And what's premium, right? It probably has a bigger audience over the year than many of the shows that actually do make it onto, whether it's a PSB or anything else.
All right, now let's go. Like, we're nearly there, so I'm not going to steal you more time, but the conversation got interesting. What do you think YouTube should do better to serve any industry that you can think of? Like, one thing that is like, okay, come on, just you should do this as a platform.
And they haven't done it, right? Like, you have YouTube TV in the US. I think YouTube should definitely figure out how to do YouTube TV that works in Europe. And it's not going to be the same model as it is in the US, simply because European audiences are not used to have advertising stuff down their throat every 2 seconds. And I think the model, the way it works with the regional sports network and other regional networks in the US, is a very different model here. But I do think there is an option for YouTube to bundle a little bit more of TV. Listen, if you look at Netflix doing a deal with TF1 in France, you can't say that there isn't an appetite to find a deal that can be done there, right? And if you're gonna do something, I think that is probably where you start. Is in that space. I think there is an opportunity to go and do that, and then I think you need to make it viable for the commercial and non-commercial networks to actually use your platform to reach audiences that they probably otherwise would not reach. I don't even think for the traditional broadcasters it is cannibalization at all. It is just people that you would otherwise never reach. And it would add an element of live to YouTube here in the region that I think is super helpful, is in the interest of the community. And by that I mean the YouTube community as well as the wider community, and is an enrichment of the ecosystem rather than actually the opposite. I think it's the most meaningful thing YouTube could do.
Cool. Very last question, which is very broad, and it's my favorite question always. What are you most proud of?
Proud of about me personally, or
as like in your career, like what you've done, what you're doing now, like.
I can think of a lot of things that I'm not proud of. That's for sure.
That
There's been
doesn't work. It's what you're proud. I'm sure you're proud
few,
of quite a few things.
few
You could
massive.
have done something right. That's for sure.
Um, I'm going to say um, I am the most proud of the fact that I think I've managed to remain authentic. I say and I do exactly what I believe is the right thing, and that's not always taken well, but I've been probably right more times than I've been wrong, I think, about some of the views and opinions that I have expressed, lived, and tried to better. And so I think I've managed to not ever give in to financial, reputational, or any other pressure in terms of trying to do the right thing in this business always. And I hope that I may long be able to continue to do this. And I think it's generated a lot of value for many people. And I hope to continue to do that. I think that's what I'm most proud of is I am unapologetically me.
It should be the title of like a book, a podcast, anything. Unapologetically me. That sounds good, and well done on that. That's not that easy. So, well, thank you very much for being on the podcast, Wim. It was very interesting to listen to your point of views, your story, and I'm very eager to see what's gonna look like your future, because I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of interesting things coming along. And you're not there to get bored ever. I mean, you've never
No,
been bored, so we're gonna listen a lot about you in the near future. That's for sure. Thank you very much, Wim.
no, thank you so much for having me, Paula. Always a pleasure to chat.
Thank you, everyone. Go follow Wim Ponnet on LinkedIn. It's worth it. He writes very interesting things and shares a lot. And see you to the next episode. Thank you. Goodbye.